How the left manipulates language. Ooh. This one seems like it'll be really fun because I get called all of these things.
Homophobia. When you break the word apart, homo, the prefix, means same.
Gay.
While the root of phobia means an irrational fear. But when you put those two words together, you don't get the irrational fear of gay people. You get the disdain and hatred of gay people. This has always perplexed me because we have words like misandry, that's the hatred of men. Miso means hatred. Ander means men. Misandry
Also means soybean paste.
Is the hatred of men. Misogyny. Miso means hatred. Gyny means women. Misogyny is the hatred of women. But miso's nowhere to be seen. It's homophobia. Why is that? People like to joke about it all the time when they're accused of being homophobic. They say, well, I'm not scared of gay people. And then you have some idiot that simply screenshots Google and says, actually, it means the intense disdain or hatred of gay people. But this is actually a little rabbit hole in itself. Because let's genuinely ask the question, why is it called a phobia? Why don't we address it as any other hatred, like the hatred of men or women? Why do we see a clear pattern that is clearly broken when it comes to homophobia? Well, when you look at the origins of the word, it comes from George Weinberg, who has a very funny name to say the least, who suggested that those who harbor prejudice against homosexuals are suffering from a psychological malady, an irrational state of the mind. And this is incredibly dangerous because what happens when you find somebody who is mentally unstable? They are currently in an irrational state of mind and they have this malady. What do you do with those people? In many instances, you can forcibly lock them up against their will.
You know, I never thought of it that way.
Because here's the power that comes with labeling things as mental disorders or mental illnesses. When it comes to law, you can lock up certain individuals against their will because they're mentally ill. They have a mental disorder.
Well, it depends, right? I don't know if that's true. It depends on the specific thing, right? You can't just lock people up for having a mental disorder.
You can lock up certain individuals.
I don't think that's true. It depends on the disorder.
In many instances,
by saying that they have a mental disorder, therefore you can lock them up, that would mean that all disorders have that property then, correct? There's no way. An individual must have a recognized mental disorder as defined by diagnostic frameworks. However, not all disorders such as mild anxiety or personality disorders automatically qualify unless they meet additional criteria, which I'm assuming is like some kind of violent thing, right? So it's like there must be clear and imminent danger, such as self-effacifying behavior, threats to others, and severe neglect to themselves and others in order to do that. So that there's like a level of severity. So like this isn't actually true. What's being said in that specific case is not true.
You can lock up certain individuals against their will because they're mentally ill. They have a mental disorder. And not only can you lock them up against their will, you can also excuse certain behavior under the pretext that it was caused by a mental disorder. He's not evil. He's not malicious. He's simply disturbed. He's simply unwell. There is a lot of power when it comes to language, when it comes to labels. And in this instance, we can see that clearly the etymology of the word makes no logical sense. It's not natural.
That is true, though. That part is true. It doesn't make sense, yeah.
Clear agenda behind the creation of this word. And
like making it like a you fear them sort of a thing, it just doesn't make sense.
How is to label certain people that you disagree with as having a psychological malady. And here's the thing, language can change over time. It can naturally evolve and words have new meanings, but what's currently happening today, especially with
the irrational anger towards a particular group of people could be construed as a danger to society. I don't think it's anger, though, all the time, right? Like, yeah, I don't think it's anger. I think it's more like dislike or disagreement, really, in a lot of cases. It's evoking disgust. Hitler used this language. Well, okay, well, I don't even think it's really... So nowadays, especially in 2025, people use that a lot to just mean disagreement, right? As far as language, it's like if you disagree with anything that gay people say, that would be considered homophobic nowadays, I think. And you might say like, well, I don't see it that way. And like, I know a lot of people here wouldn't, but that's how a lot of like communities take it. They conflate it, yeah. Whether it's anger all the time doesn't necessarily matter if a psychologist and judge define it as such. But see, I think the thing is, I don't really buy that that's like, I mean, sure, like a judge hold on. So a judge and a psychologist, they could like twist the words, obviously, and fuck around with you. There are bad psychologists. Bad. I guess what you're trying to say is that like the fact that they could possibly use it for that, but it's not in the rules that you can. It doesn't even count though. Yeah, what is this? Yeah, it doesn't even count though. Homophobia is not considered a mental disorder. So this is just like conceptually. This has nothing to do with law.
Words like sexist or racist is that they're being changed artificially from top to bottom. It's not something that's simply happening with people over time. This is coming from an academic level where they're trying to artificially change definitions, words that have strong impacts in our society, like racist or sexist, and changing the meaning of them to weaponize them. Now, all of a sudden, when you have a word such as racist, whenever you use that word, you think of a person who treats another individual unfairly because of their race, not because of anything they did or because of their character, simply because of the color of their skin. But now they're taking that word and forcibly, artificially changing it to mean something else.
I do agree. I do agree with this though, that it's not consistent. It's not consistent with the rest of language. And when it comes to language, the important thing is being clear about communication, and the fact that they specifically made it like a different term. I think that to confuse things, I think is a bad thing.
Now it no longer has to do with simply your actions, but in order to be racist now, it's prejudice plus power, meaning certain groups are automatically racist and others cannot be racist.
Yep.
This is class warfare, a direct attack on people. Now look, these are actually interesting things. I think there's a bit of truth to them. For example, when it comes to systemic racism, if you have a group of people who have power within a society and they are using that against a different race, that's distinctly different from individuals being racist towards each other. The problem is, though, they're forcibly removing the meaning of that word to exemplify and excuse certain behavior against specific groups while automatically vilifying others. That is a weapon, and that is something that needs to be actively
That actually is true. That by changing the word, they're basically saying that like racism, like in the way that it is known and the way we all understand it, is okay against white people, for instance. And like sexism is okay against men, right? Specifically white men is more what it's used against.
Fought against, because that is a direct attack against innocent people, even children that did nothing wrong. Now all of a sudden you have a group that can't do anything wrong and another that can't do anything right. And again, I'm not against the evolution of language. Language changes all the time. It happens, it's natural. The problem is, this is artificial. There is an agenda behind this. And look, you can explore certain concepts, have words to express what you mean, but you're not allowed to artificially change language with an agenda to weaponize it against people, especially innocent people and children. That is wrong. And that is exactly what the left is doing against us. We have to call this out for what it is. This is not natural.
And dude, the most nasty form of this, in my opinion, is like when they use it in schools. They just have like a session where they just basically shit on all the white kids in the class. It's freaking awful. I hate that.
This is political. This is a direct attack against people. So when people try and bring up these changes in definitions,
struggle
when
sessions,
it comes to racism, sexism,
it's just awful. It's awful to like teach kids that they're inherently bad because they're a certain race or sex or certain like sexual orientation. And I think that's vile evil. To like make a kid feel bad about themselves because of some inherent immutable characteristic that they have is evil, really.
or even the usage of the word homophobia. Just know what is actually happening, whether they're conscious of it or not. This is what they're trying to do. This is why it makes no sense. Anyways, that's it for this video. A shorter video, but I think one that's very important. I really hope it helps you. And
I should agree with like most of that.
I think you'll enjoy some of my other videos. Anyways, have a good one.
The only thing I was a little bit like kind of like I didn't really get much was like the locking people up thing. But the rest of it was like pretty like, yeah, I pretty much agree with it. They're using the ability to redefine words against people, basically. And again, I also explained to you like the most evil form of it, which like happens nowadays, right? Locking people up things changed because they're making personality traits into mental disorders. I mean, for that, it's like, I think it depends really. Like, I don't know. I think we should pick like one way we want to do it. Like, when we say mental disorder, this is what I mean about being clear about language and about how like we need to all understand like if you have people that keep changing definitions, then it makes it difficult to have any communication, right? Communication is like the core. It is the key to solving any sort of problem, right, between people, is having a meaningful conversation where you have clear terms. And this is why, like, if you ever see me like get into like a talk with somebody, I'll be like, can you define this? Right? Like they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I don't like racism. I'm like, okay, can you define racism? And I'm not asking for definitions to be cheeky. Like, I'm not trying to ask for it to be like, well, actually, this is what it means. Like, well, can you even define it? Like, that's not even what I'm trying to do. When I ask for a definition, it's because I want to make sure we're using the same language. Does that make sense? It's like, are we speaking of the same terms when we speak? Otherwise, like, anything we talk about, if we don't have an agreement on like what certain words means, everything is a moot point. Like there's no purpose to even have a conversation, right? Before, most of us were born being gay and something that you could get sent to a mental institution. Yeah. And so to go onto that point is, I think we should be more clear about what we mean by mental disorder, right? So if we're going to say that like a mental disorder is something you can lock people up for, then we would have to change the definitions, right? We would have to redefine, I think, mental disorders that are like more functional and lighter. We should redefine those into something else so that we're not using the same word and then causing problems where this seems like a problem of understanding, right? Because if we classify a dangerous, so if we have a system where we say, yeah, we're going to lock up people with mental disorders, right? And then one mental disorder is like, it's really bad. Like person's like freaking out and they're attacking anything in sight. And that's like a mental disorder, right? And then you have a person who's like, just slightly like kind of quirky, and we use that as like a mental disorder as well. Like, a person that gets depressed, for instance, we'll say like that's also a mental disorder. And then you then say, yeah, we should be able to lock up people with mental disorders in asylums. Do you see how like the definition then matters a lot? Like if you're gonna say that anxiety is like a mental disorder, and also like hardcore schizophrenia is a mental disorder, and then mental disorder should be locked up, they're not even like close to the same. Do you see what I mean? So it's like either we need to have a better law that like addresses it and like has more clear criteria, or we need to redefine anxiety as not a mental disorder. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it doesn't help to have such extreme things within the same basket and try to apply a blanket solution to the whole thing. It doesn't make any sense, right? I just want to point out that the term xenophobia, I'm not even gonna lie, guys. I don't even know what that means. Like, really, xenophobia? Like, dude, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm fucking scared of the alien. They fucking crawl in the gutters and shit, and they come out like they got their little mouth on the tongue and shit. It's fucking weird. The term was coined in the 1800s, also refers to hatred or disdain of foreigners. The phenomenon of manipulating language is real, but suggesting that the coining of the term homophobia is some leftist plot to confuse people without evidence, and the historical precedent of it being used that way is retarded to me, says 50 Squiggly. Well, okay, so again, on that specific case of the homophobia one, that one is a little weird, but it is true that it's interesting that it's not, like, again, like racist, misogynist, right? Like, and then out of nowhere, homophobia, xenophobia, like it doesn't convey the same meaning. And like I guess you could say again that like I mean, he brought this up in his video as well, that language does change over time, but it is very confusing. And I think that does cause a situation where there can be issues with communication, right? But the other stuff he said is definitely true. Like them trying to redefine racism. And like, how many of you guys, I mean, you guys have all seen this, right? Like they've tried to redefine what racism means to mean more than just like they've added like a power structure to racism that was not in the original intent or definition. And so like when you have two people, you have one person saying racist and another person saying racist, it's like, do you mean the prejudice part or prejudice plus power? Which one is it? Because they're both different, right? Like for instance, I still consider it racist if a person discriminates against a white person. I still think that that's racist. Whereas like a like hardcore leftist person would say that that's impossible for it to be racist because there's no power component. And I disagree with that, right? But then again, if I'm having a conversation with a leftist, how could I possibly even discuss the topic of racism without the definition, right? Like them like fucking up the language makes it difficult to have a discussion, and maybe that's the point, right? Maybe that is the point. And because I mean, you do see a lot of cases where people don't want to debate. You have cases where people on the left just don't even want to argue anything. So I can see using the language to kind of smoke and mirrors shit, like, kind of makes sense to me, right? That's literally why. Yeah. Because the problem is a lot of the arguments on the hardcore left, the woke left, they don't make sense at all. Like they're very easy to fight in terms of a debate or like a discussion. A lot of their beliefs are kind of very shallow, and they're not really well rooted in any sort of logic. And this is why you see a lot. I mean, I can just prove it. Like, you just watch like any of these like lib gets owned videos on YouTube. It's the same formula. It's basically a person that is like logical, basically just saying like, okay, well, like, how would that apply in this case? Or like, what do you think of this? And then they just kind of get to a wall where they can't argue past it, and then they just basically give up.